Hello everyone, welcome to the movie of What If Deku Was Itachi, a collab with the GOAT Xehther himself. Now sorry this took so long, I'm not even gonna lie, that's my bad, I've been slack as, but who cares, it's out now. I hope you end up liking this. I tried to throw a couple of curveballs into the mix, so look forward to that. Xehther will be taking the first part of the story, going from Deku's birth to UA, and I'll be doing the rest. If you've seen his part, skip to here, if not, then enjoy. Before you enjoy though, like, sub, and comment please. I try to respond to as many comments as I can, and while you're down there, check out the stuff in the description along with Xehther's original part 1 and the thumbnail maker JustOM's channel. Enough said, Xehther, take it away.
We begin our story with a zoom in on a young Izuku Midoriya who would be, say, 4 years old. As young Izuku would be in class, the teacher would call everybody up asking them for their names, since today would be their first day in class. And as Izuku would go up and say that his name was Izuku Midoriya, a blonde-haired boy would tease his name, saying that it sounds kinda like Deku. Izuku, however, wouldn't pay any mind to this and wouldn't even show any hint of being bothered by it. So, later after class, Bakugo, in another attempt to try to bother him or try to get some sort of reaction, would attempt something else. But Deku just walks away and tells him he's childish, leading the blonde-haired boy's eyebrow to raise and have an expression of, huh? As his friends would ask Bakugo what he's gonna do about that, but the boy would just walk off and Bakugo would swing his hand at the air, saying it's not even worth it. It's at this point that weeks would pass and eventually Bakugo would unlock his quirk, shocking everybody with praises coming from everyone with the exception of Izuku. And this would piss Bakugo off, because at this point now he feels like the coolest person ever and he can do no wrong. And here comes Izuku Midoriya, who is pretty much flipping his entire worldview on its head. So Bakugo, deciding that he's tired of the kid, would end up taking the free period, which is kind of like their recess, to go over towards Deku alongside his goons. This is where he would begin asking Deku what quirk he has, with Izuku telling him that he has a quirk called energy manipulation, which Bakugo would make fun of, telling him that he would like to see him. Manipulate energy, Izuku? Come on, show us that great quirk of yours, unless you're actually quirkless. Leading Deku to look at Bakugo and just kind of walk away rolling his eyes. It's at this point that Bakugo would crackle some explosions in his hands, saying, maybe I didn't make myself clear enough, Deku, but if you don't show me your quirk, I'm gonna blast you to Kingdom Come. With the young Izuku simply staring back at him with just an expression of don't even try it. But Bakugo, being the person that he is, would attempt it. And so the second that he would lush towards the direction of Deku, Deku would simply sidestep his explosion as he would grab his wrist and pin Bakugo down to the ground. Both of his goons standing there would be like, how did he? As Bakugo would yell out, don't just stand there, come on, beat him up. But with Deku's imposing glare staring right at them, each boy would be too scared to move, opting to just leave Bakugo behind, prompting Deku to finally release Bakugo, who'd be like, let me go. This is when he would walk away and call him a freaking loser, telling him that he just got lucky this time, as he would leave and Deku would be left to read his favorite manga about ninjas and taijutsu and all this other cool stuff, which inspires Deku to want to inherit a battle style similar to them. So for the following 3 years, Deku would focus on a lot of things, primarily chakra related things, which would lead the young boy to understand chakra healing, chakra water walking and wall walking, as well as chakra punches and kicks, which are essentially just the usage of Tsunade and Sakura when it comes to their monstrous punches, you know, like that's the reason that they're able to punch really hard. So with Deku having applied all these principles to his own fighting style, Deku would be a pretty formidable opponent for a 7-year-old, but still not quite on the level of the real Itachi when he was 7, because keep in mind, the guy actually had real ninjutsu stuff to study, actual hand signs, and Deku pretty much doesn't have any of that. He's kind of playing the role of Indra in the sense that he has to invent his own styles of ninshu, which are pretty much just ninjutsu, but I digress. Point being, by the time that Deku would be 7 years old, his dominance in the classroom and in his peers around him would be way too crazy, because he would be the fastest kid, which if y'all remember being in elementary school, that got you straight aura. He would also be the strongest kid, he would be the smartest kid, he's basically just Itachi, which makes him an absolute GOAT, and Bakugo would just be seething in rage of jealousy about Deku, because in his eyes, Deku doesn't even have quirk, and he's beating him at everything, with Bakugo making excuses for himself and saying that he just needs time for his quirk to develop, and that, yeah, well, once my quirk develops, I'll be way stronger than him. There's no shot a quirkless nobody could keep up with me when we're older. But I hate to burst your bubble, Bakugo, that's not gonna happen. Anyways though, around the time that Deku would be about to turn 8 years old, Deku and his family would decide to go out to Party City to get some cool little supplies for his birthday party, with Deku kind of tagging along, kind of nonchalantly being like, I don't really need a party, saying that all he would really care about is spending time with his family. But his family would be completely against that notion, and so finding themselves in the midst of a literal villain incident, Deku would watch on as a desperate villain would end up injecting himself with a strange serum, the hero Endeavor arriving shortly after, as the man would grow in size 4 times over. This is when grabbing cars and whatever rubble and debris nearby him, he would start tossing it towards the direction of the heroes, with Endeavor dodging out of the way, leaving time to nearly pause for a second in front of Deku, as he would watch this gigantic semi-truck trailer being hurled straight at the direction of his family. And with Deku being inside of the car, seeing as they had told him to wait there because they were going to get a surprise for him, Deku would just watch on in borderline slow motion as this gigantic semi-truck would reduce them to just sludge, because the explosion that followed would make sure that there was no traces of his family left. And with Izuku having seen that point blank at the age of 7 years old, his eyes would turn a crimson red, with one tomoe appearing in each eye, with Deku rushing out to the scene in an attempt to find his family. However, it's here that the gas leak would explode in Deku's face and he would be sent back, hurled to the ground unconscious. Once Deku would be woken up, he would be told of everything that had taken place, how a hero incident had led to the death of his family, and how seeing as Izuku didn't have any immediate family members, Izuku was now rendered an orphan. So with that revelation being told to Deku and him immediately understanding what had happened, he would watch on as the non-caring cop would pretty much file a bit of paperwork and send him off to whatever orphanage was open and accepting people. The moment Izuku would get there, he would be greeted to a sight of an unruly orphanage. Messed up beds, kids fighting, bloodstains, the bathrooms, I mean, you guys could imagine what the bathrooms look like. It was bad. So with Izuku trying to make the best of his situation, Izuku would make his way towards some of the people, asking where he can sleep at. This is when the kids would pretty much bark back at him, telling him that he can find a corner to lay down for all they care, that the bed is reserved for them and they already have enough people on it as it stands, so he can figure it out or not, they don't care. And so Izuku, making his way towards the corner of the room, which didn't look too dirty, he'd sit down and start reading his manga. This, however, is when suddenly another boy would arrive saying, "Hey, you're in my corner," and it'd be a more larger kid. The guy was like 16 years old. So with Deku looking at him, he would say he's sorry and go to leave. But the boy would push him back down onto the ground, with Deku staring at his eyes almost as if to dare him to try it. This is when the boy would kind of like reel his head back and be like thinking about like whether to actually fight him, when suddenly Izuku's eyes would go red, because he's already not been having a good day and he wasn't in the mood. This would just immediately cause the kid to stand down as he would say, I'm sorry, wrong spot, as he walks away and is just like, I don't even want to know what that kid's quirk is. And with Izuku now sitting back down and kind of like closing his eyes, assessing the situation he's now put in, Izuku would think that it's up to him to make the most of this. Clearly the adults around here are more so incompetent and the kids are just, they're out of control. So Izuku would decide that he needs to start putting his own part and setting an example of how they have to live around here. So for the next year, Izuku would do a big part in helping to clean things up, doing laundry, cleaning the walls with a piece of soap and a little sponge, drying them up with his own clothes, seeing as they don't even have rags to do that. And as Izuku would do this and start to make the room look cleaner, some of the other kids would make fun of him, saying not to bother, that it'll just get dirty, with Izuku saying then he'll clean it again. And with more of the kids finally being like, yo, like, this guy's trying to make a difference in the way that we're living. Like, I wouldn't mind living in a clean house. So people would actually start helping Izuku, and that would be the first step towards changing the area he would grow up in. More and more people would start being friendly to Izuku, which would ultimately lead more people to start actually enjoying having him around. He's a breath of fresh air. He wasn't trying to assert his dominance, though he actually did have an incredible quirk, and that would be something everybody could tell. Izuku was already the strongest person there, and he was about to barely be 9 years old. So with that being the case, by the end of the 1 year mark, even though they wouldn't have enough money for beds or all of this other crazy stuff, Deku would kind of set up a system where they kind of share the beds, in the sense that they all sleep sideways, so like 6 people can fit on the bed, and they do their most to like try to get comfy. During cold nights, Izuku would have developed a jutsu that could allow him to create a fire on his own without endangering his classmates, and so long as he was there powering it throughout the night, I said classmates, but his orphanage buddies would be able to rest and not freeze to death practically during during the night times. This eventually would lead to the cafeteria getting cleaned up, the rooms, the bathrooms, and everything you can really think of, all the while Deku would go on learning new jutsus and new ways to use chakra, developing brand new ways of controlling his ninshu. And with Deku finally turning 9 years old, it's at this point that he would pretty much bring an idea towards the adults, telling them that seeing as the orphanage is struggling to actually make ends meet, what they could actually do is maybe try to help out some organization that helps others out, because that way maybe, just maybe, they might even have a couple of things to spare for them. Organizations that might help the homeless people out, or people who simply help the sick and needy. Whatever you really think of, Izuku puts that offer on the table. And with the organization saying that they don't have the manpower and that their employees are already booked, though they really don't do anything, Deku would say that he doesn't mind actually going out to volunteer. And worst case scenario, he comes back and it doesn't work out. But best case, this could be a great way to help the orphanage out. And with the, pretty much like the manager of it being like, do whatever you want, Deku would make his way towards a nearby, like needy shelter, where Deku would have to walk 6 miles away to get there. Once there, Deku would end up putting on a little apron and a hairnet, as he just pretty much starts handing out food. He starts boxing things up, cleaning up the little organization place, and just doing as much as he possibly can to be helpful. This ultimately would lead to the people there being like, dude, let's give this guy some money, because he was doing it for free. And so they give him a little bit, not money, but they give him a blanket and warmers and extra food and all this shoes and stuff and socks. And Deku's so grateful. So taking all of this stuff back home, he ends up showing the orphanage that because of his kindness, they paid it back forward. So he thinks that maybe if more of his classmates were capable of helping, maybe they would be more inclined to help out the orphanage. And seeing as at work, they're like, oh, whatever, take 3 of the kids with you. So taking more of the older kids, seeing as they're more capable than the others, they make their way there and they just start helping, which ultimately leads to the actual non-profit organization that helps the needy to even grow and do things even faster, which ultimately means that there's more stuff in stock for them to actually take back to the orphanage, which eventually results in them getting more beds, them having more toilet paper, which is stuff that they literally run out of all the time, them to finally have their shower renovated, because the shower that they had at the orphanage barely even sprayed water, and you had to kind of stand there for a long time, and it ran up the water bill, which was crazy because who knows where the heck it was going to. And so with Izuku making all this progress at the little orphanage, it becomes a much better place for people to be taken to. And with Izuku having all of these talents, I mean, obviously people who are trying to adopt wouldn't be blind. Eventually, once the orphanage looks half decent, people would actually finally start checking it out. Reviews start getting better, and this would lead people to actually want to adopt Izuku. Not much of a shocker, but seeing as Izuku would care more if his buddies were the ones to get adopted, he would kind of play the role of a wingman, helping them to convince the adults and parents that Izuku doesn't need a loving home and that he loves it here, but there's kids that really do need it. And so with some years passing, most of his friends that he would have met at the beginning of the orphanage would have been adopted, and they go on to lead pretty decent lives. And so with Izuku pretty much being an unofficial manager, I guess you could say, for all this time, Deku would ultimately end up finally getting to himself to a point where somebody finally wanted to adopt him and was not taking no for an answer. Typically, most people, after being told by Izuku that he wasn't really looking for that, would end up pretty much just accepting it and saying that he's a great kid and has a humble heart. But overhaul, yeah, he was not playing it. And now here's where I have to explain it. Why in the world would Overhaul want to adopt Itachi Deku? Now let me put it into perspective. You guys remember how Deku was helping out the needy and stuff like that, and Izuku was there for years and years on end? This means that at this point of the story, Izuku would be 16 years old and would have already developed a multitude of jutsus, because keep in mind, helping out at the orphanage doesn't mean that he never stopped to think about how he was going to get stronger. Because at the end of the day, Deku's goal is still to become a pro hero, even if the circumstances had changed a little bit since when he was younger. Because throughout the years, thanks to a little incident that ended up taking place at UA High, UA was actually turned into a college in this timeline, after the death of a student in Shirakumo. So with that being the case, Izuku now has to wait till he's 18 years old, which is actually the age where he's finally going to get let out of the orphanage, to even try to do that. And back to the reason why Overhaul adopts him, What would pretty much take place is that one of the men who would be down on his luck, specifically the guy with the crystal quirk from season 4, would have actually been at the needy place and would have seen Izuku not only use the ability to clone himself thanks to the clone jutsu, but would have also seen that those clones were capable of producing fire, those clones were capable of cooking and doing all this other crazy stuff, and it would lead him to like pretty much end up mentioning that that kid is pretty strong, right? So one day when Overhaul was pretty much saying that they need new members, stronger people, he would say that he remembers one kid that was incredibly exceptional. And after bringing up the fact that he was part of like a needy program, Overhaul looks into this guy wanting to recruit him. But when he finds out he's literally an orphan at 16 years old, Overhaul's like, oh, say less. Like, he ain't even got to say yes to me. I can just adopt him. So making his way to the orphanage and specifically requesting Deku, he would end up adopting the young 16-year-old, with Deku making his way to the Yakuza house, where Deku would quickly go on to discover the nefarious schemes that are taking place there. Cause I mean, it's not like the dude's blind. I mean, he has the sharingan, right? So when Izuku would arrive, he would instantly tell that these people are not exactly your goody two-shoe average citizens. And after being there for literally just 2 weeks, Izuku would understand this is clearly a gang organization, if not straight up just a villainous. And with Izuku deciding that maybe he can enact change here as well, he would do his best to try. But that's when one day Izuku would actually take note of a small girl with gray whitish hair. And with Izuku noticing that there was a little girl undergoing crazy circumstances, she was terrified, bro. Izuku's just he's not having any of it. What ends up taking place is sort of like a mini arc, which would end up overtaking the Overhaul arc. And what we see happen in this point in time is that after Izuku discovers the nature of Aries' capture, how they're using her and all that stuff, and finds out that these are literally the Yakuza house members, Izuku pretty much goes straight to Overhaul and tells him that he not only has to release him, but Aries as well. And with Overhaul pretty much laughing, not taking him seriously, saying, what is he doing, playing hero? Izuku would get very serious, leading Overhaul to say, go get him, as multiple villains would lunge towards Deku's direction, and Deku in one swift move would throw throwing cards at each of their directions, similarly to how Itachi would use shuriken, because obviously, I mean, there's no real way he would get his hands on that, but throwing cards, a little more realistic in this world. And with that being the case, all of Overhaul's men would be pinned down slightly, long enough for Deku to use genjutsu on them, leaving them stuck in a trance where they didn't even know which world was real or fake anymore. And with Overhaul staring at him, pissed off at the fact that he dared try to defy him like that, Overhaul would scream out as, placing his hands on the ground, he would shoot a ton of spikes towards the direction of Deku, which the young boy would dodge, following that by a fire style jutsu, sending a ball of flame square at the direction of Overhaul, who using the ground in front of him would go on to create a similarly to a mud wall jutsu. Izuku, seeing this, would decide that this is around the time that he needs to use that jutsu, and weaving hand signs for the clone jutsu, a special kind of clone jutsu that he had actually developed in his time in the orphanage, Deku would appear right behind Overhaul, him saying predictable, as the moment that he would touch the clone, it would explode into a multitude of crows, catching an off-guard Overhaul, as Izuku would have just enough time to knock Overhaul out with one clean strike. After taking the man down, he would end up restraining him in such a way that he couldn't use his hands, seeing as he definitely would have done his homework on Overhaul's quirk, and seeing it live in action would have definitely helped. And with that said, Izuku literally saves Eri on his own and calls the police, which leads to a pro-hero raid on the place, which Izuku already single-handedly took care of. This whole incident would go down in the news as heroes taking down the Yakuza family and taking the girl Arian, because obviously, you know, she would still once again be taken care of by Aizawa, which would lead Izuku kind of just to be left in a standstill. Like, what happens? Is he just gonna go back to the orphanage? And Izuku would kind of agree with that. He's like, yeah, I don't mind going back to the orphanage. So he returns for about a week or so, with the real news of this eventually getting to Principal Nezu, who, after finding out that there's a kid in an orphanage with that much potential, would decide that he might as well give the boy a scholarship, seeing as if he wants to become a hero, this is the best place to do it. So Nezu would reach out to the orphanage and would give an offer to Deku, telling him that for the next 2 years, they can offer their training facilities as well as a home for him and most of his friends there at the orphanage, in exchange for Izuku going to UA, accepting the scholarship, and going on to be one of their sponsored heroes. And with Deku kind of being like, dude, I have nothing to lose and these people get a home, he would just immediately accept. And now, having access to UA's facilities and pro heroes and stuff like that, Deku's training would be taken up a notch, as he would go wanted to hone his taijutsu fighting style, actually get his hands on real shuriken and kunai and threads that can literally cut you down like the same ones they use in Naruto, he would develop a ninja-like-esque fighting style with a lot of espionage and hiding tactics and all that stuff, kind of becoming an Itachi-like figure in his own special way. By this point in the story, he would be at around the strength level of a 14-year-old Itachi canonically in the Naruto storyline, which, keep in mind, is literally Anbu level Itachi minus the Mangekyo, but that's still really freaking strong for the My Hero world. And with all of the random tips and tricks and hacks that Itachi has at his disposal, the next section of the story is going to be a little crazy. But anyways, with Izuku having access to UA stuff for like literally 2 years, Izuku would get very, very strong. And by the time that he would be 18, like I said previously, he would be at around Itachi Anbu levels, meaning that Izuku's first day of school would finally come around, seeing as, you know, he's literally already accepted a UA and his test of getting in was practically taken down overall. We would see Izuku as first in the classroom, with Katsuki Bakugo actually being the second one in, and Deku immediately noting that he recognizes him. This is when Bakugo would walk over towards him and with a little bit of a snarl go, "Huh? Deku, what are you doing here?" With Deku staring at Bakugo and telling him that he's part of UA, saying that it's been a long time, with Bakugo laughing in his face and telling him that he can't wait to show him just how much stronger he's gotten. Deku thinking, and the same goes to you. All the while Bakugo would sit down, and eventually we would have the interaction between Bakugo and Ida, Aizawa explaining to the students that they need to meet him outside, and the quirk apprehension test introduction starting. Once outside, Deku would have a ball tossed towards him by Aizawa, who would have already explained to Deku that he was going to be pretty much the benchmark for the rest of the students, as he would begin doing the first part, the ball throw, throwing it, significantly far since he definitely would have amped his arm with chakra. But with Bakugo watching this, he would have like a smirk on his face thinking, "That's it, guess I wasn't so wrong when I said he was quirkless." As we would watch on as Deku would take the grip strength test, ranking decently high among the rest of the students, before then taking the standing long jump part, where he would quite literally create a clone of himself mid-air to pretty much jump off of. And with the rest of the class seeing this, thinking that he has a clone quirk, they would think that that's so awesome. And when the next step would come out, they would be even more stunned, because it doesn't seem like cloning is the only thing he can do. The dude would use the body flicker when he's actually doing the repeated side-to-side steps, and he would be moving so damn fast that they're like, "Is that a super speed quirk too?" With the entirety of the class shocked and Bakugo being just caught off guard. He'd be pissed off as he rushes at Deku about to ask what his deal is, when Aizawa would stop him, telling him that if he got one more step closer to Deku, he wasn't going to be able to hold him back. And with Bakugo pissed off at the fact that he was protecting Bakugo from Deku, he would wonder what the hell's going on here, asking Aizawa as much, as Deku would simply go on to perform the remaining tests, which is pretty much just the sprint, the sit-ups, and the push-ups. And with Izuku getting incredible scores during that, seeing as he has amazing endurance, Deku would be the bar that all of the students would have to try to get to. And with the test finally coming and going, everybody would pretty much rank around the same level as you would expect in canon. Deku obviously being in the high tiers, as with the day finally being over, we would have a scene in which as Deku would pretty much be grabbing his things, we would see a girl walking over towards him, pretty much congratulating on him on his performance and questioning what his quirk was, which Deku, looking up to see that the girl was Momo, he would say, "Oh, nice to meet ya," pretty much introducing himself, as she's kind of like blushing because, he got that Itachi aura. She's kind of going to be like his Izumi. He would say, "Oh no, my quirk has nothing to do with clones or speed. It's actually energy manipulation," with her questioning how that works. As Izuku would say if she wants, they can actually walk and talk. And so they would do just that, making their way outside where Momo would be greeted by a limousine that had just picked her up, as Izuku would finish explaining the uses for his quirk, saying that not only does it have the capabilities of producing incredible techniques such as that, but he can also produce all 5 of the elements of nature. And with Momo hearing this, she would be stunned, saying that his quirk gives him the potential to be one of the top ranking heroes ever. So with Izuku simply smiling and ruffling his hand through his hair, he would pretty much tell her, "Yeah, I guess it does," as he would say that her quirk is incredible as well, going on to explain a couple of uses he would think for it if he had her abilities, saying not only is it incredible for that, but it even helps her stay trim. With Momo starting to blush like crazy, seeing as she's all like, "He thinks I look good," with Deku kind of like not even having said that like in any type of way, like he was literally just making an observation. And so with Momo finally getting in the I was gonna say bus, but no, limo, she would wave out the window, with Deku making his way back towards the dormitory.
Hate to say it, Xehther, legitimately nothing's gonna happen with Momo. Deku gets back to his dorm, sees a text on his phone, and completely ignores it, putting it on silent and going to go play like basketball or something instead. Getting tired as hell, going back to sleep, and going back to class the very next day. Like you would think he would sit all his regular classes like math, English, and stuff, not even needing to take notes half the time, answering a couple of questions and stuff until the final class of the day would arrive. Everyone's sitting kind of tired and just like kind of bored in general. Bakugo sitting next to Deku just like staring at him in his head, just being like, damn Deku, until they're all caught off guard. Everyone's surprised as the door would suddenly get kicked in, everyone jumping until they see who runs through the door. This of course being All Might. Now like usual, everyone would freak out. Deku knew All Might was teaching here, but teaching his class is crazy work. Lowkey freaking out on the inside a little bit, trying to hide it, you know. Don't get me wrong, Deku's not like the biggest All Might fan, but you know, it's still All Might. Him of course rushing through the door like a normal person, kicking the door open and running to the front of the class, looking around the place before grabbing a button out of his pocket. Before I even start the class, booyah! All Might presses the button as the wall next to him would start to like pop out, popping into about 20 individual boxes, which would of course be everyone's costumes, sorry, no uniforms. As they see this, they immediately would go rush to go grab him. Deku running to grab his and sitting back down again, staring at it in his hand with a big smile on his face as All Might would explain the activity. All Might going over the whole like heroes versus villains thing and explaining the basics of the activity before telling everyone to go get dressed, which, you know, everyone of course does so, running immediately out the door, rushing to the changing rooms and putting their costumes on, walking down to All Might as the whole like my hero thing goes on in the background. All Might looking around the crowd and being like, I am so proud of all of you, you look very clean, complimenting Bakugo, Deku, before looking at the tail bum. Man, I'm not gonna lie, you're gonna have to change. You look cheeks. Ojiro going to change as All Might would explain the proper activity, the heroes versus villains bomb test, telling everyone how it's going to work before getting them to all pull the balls out of like the box thing, you know, I don't know what it's called, you know, getting paired up, and of course being paired up like in canon. Deku and Uraraka versus Bakugo and Ida. Deku staring at Bakugo, who stares right back at him, giving him a shit-eating grin, exploding a couple explosions in his hand and doing like the thumb to the throat thing, you know, like the I'm gonna kill you type of thing. Deku kind of just sitting and giggling as Bakugo would walk off, doing some Bakugo type of stuff, like punching a wall or something like that, trying to look tough. Walking inside with Ida as Deku and Uraraka would make their way to the front. Deku about to talk until Uraraka talks first. Damn, nice costume. Did you design it yourself? That's clean, I'm not gonna lie. Deku like dabs her up, you know. Yeah, I did actually. Deku's of course gonna be rocking the Akatsuki, like the robe, the black robe with the red clouds on it. That shit is way too iconic not to use. Plus it like hides his hands and stuff for his hand signs, which is, you know, added benefit. I feel like Deku would choose something like that in the canon anyway. Deku explaining why he chose like the whole outfit, before the two of them would start to talk about each other's quirks and stuff, going into proper detail until All Might would interrupt, blaring over the intercom and starting to yap, telling them that they're allowed to go inside. Deku hearing this walks right inside, Uraraka following behind him as he would put his hands up, making a hand sign and summoning about 4 clones in front of him. Uraraka at first confused until all 4 of them would split, running off into different directions, one going left, one going right, and 2 going upstairs. Deku and Uraraka walking calmly as all 4 of them would sprint around the place, running like Naruto, you know, putting their hands behind him and stuff, rushing around corners, using his quirk to like stick to walls and stuff, and completely scanning the first floor. The 2 clones that were just downstairs completely disappear, feeding the info back to Deku, who calmly walks up to the second floor, making it about 3/4 of the way up the staircase before the other 2 clones upstairs disappear too. Information flowing back to him and telling him that the second floor was clear too, which left only the 3rd and final floor. People in the observation room are shocked seeing this. What? He can use clones too? Kinda just mad about how OP Deku was until Deku would start moving again, skipping the second floor completely and going straight up to the 3rd floor, walking up and meeting someone who was just about to drop to the second. Bakugo. Deku and Uraraka watched from a distance as Bakugo would drop down, leading Ida down a teammate and completely defenseless. Knowing this, Deku and Uraraka would walk straight inside, meeting Ida head on, who was horrified seeing them 2 coming so quick. Did you beat Bakugo that quick? No matter. Damn heroes. He like tries to get into character, doing his whole evil laugh thing, until Deku would flare his sharingan off, catching the corner of Ida's eye and putting him into a genjutsu. Uraraka watching as Ida would drop to the floor, completely limp, slumping down as the 2 of them would go touch the bomb. I would have made Uraraka help out more, but I kinda want Deku to show off a little bit, you know? And due to that, Deku looks like a complete god to everyone else. In their eyes, Deku just completely dodged Bakugo and one-shot Ida by looking at him. I mean, like, yeesh, I'd be scared too. Deku's actual quirk pretty mysterious to everyone. I mean, Just an energy quirk shouldn't allow people to do this. Deku and Uraraka are of course getting the win as they would go back to class. Bakugo hearing they got the win getting pissed. Damn it Deku, why won't you fight me? Going and blaring explosions off at the second floor as Deku would wake Ida up, taking him and Uraraka back to the observation room. As soon as they get back, everyone starts glazing right away. Everyone except for two people, Bakugo and Todoroki, who was sitting like, whatever, acting like they could do something about it, with everyone else going through the rest of their matches like in canon, except for like Todoroki, who in this timeline I think would completely freeze everyone. I could see him trying to like one-up Deku in this timeline, especially with Deku having the whole like elemental power, leading to Tail Bomb and Invisible Girl getting completely frozen solid, getting Todoroki and Momo the win. Deku seeing this, Loki keeps a keen eye on Todoroki, you know, going through and watching everyone else until the end of the day would come around. All Might giving his final thoughts on the class before everyone is dismissed. Deku kind of sitting around and like talking to everyone, you know, being friendly, and actually being the last person in class, walking out and talking to All Might until Aizawa would stop him, looking around the place before telling him to follow him. Deku hearing this is kind of confused, looking around too before like kind of shrugging, just walking behind him, following Aizawa silently as he walked through the hallways. In his head he kind of like weighed up what was happening, trying to figure out if he was like in trouble or anything, until Aizawa would speak up. So kid, I was watching your battle just then. You know, you can't rely on cheap tricks like that every fight. Deku's still trying to get it as Aizawa would make his way into a gym, walking through an empty open gym and putting his bag down. Deku looks around the place as Aizawa would start to stretching his arms and stuff before looking at Deku, slowly grabbing onto his capture tape and shooting it towards Deku in a sneak attack. Deku barely sees it shooting towards his face, dodging out of the way just in time and activating his sharingan. Aizawa looking back over again. There it is again. It's that same eye. Watching as Deku would grab onto the capture tape, yanking Aizawa straight towards him, about to clothesline him until Aizawa cancels his quirk, jumping over him and smirking at him. He even reacted to that. Deku feeling his sharingan deactivate smiles too. It says you want to fight, run it. Getting on his like toes and stuff before walking in towards Aizawa. The two of them going in and throwing straight hands in the middle. Deku Loki getting stomped because he's quirkless, you know, he can't use his sharingan. Deku Loki feeling the pressure, bad close combat. Knowing he's cooked, he feints a hit right towards Aizawa's eyes, forcing Aizawa to blink right as Deku would jump backwards, getting his quirk back and immediately activating the sharingan, doing a handspring backwards and sending a huge fireball jutsu right at the floor in front of him, kicking up dust, cracking the floor and sending smoke up into the air. Deku using this to block Aizawa's view, getting ready before jumping right through it. Mid-air, Deku would throw his arms down, getting two playing cards into his hands, you know, kind of like reloading it almost, putting them between the fingers on both of his hand before throwing them right at Aizawa. Two of them whizzing past him on the left side as two of them graze his cheek on the right side. Aizawa barely dodging him, getting cut a little bit on his cheek before Deku would pull his hands back. Aizawa at first confused until he sees something shimmering in the light in front of him, eyes going wide as he hears the cards whizzing behind him. Aizawa turning to face him as Deku would put them both into one hand, putting his other hand to a hand sign as he charges something. Aizawa watching the cards as the invisible line would begin to charge with lightning, zapping and spilling out everywhere before concentrating right onto the cards. As soon as the lightning would hit the cards, they would start spinning quicker and quicker. Deku's lightning style spitting him up to a point where he couldn't even see him anymore. They were just a blur. Watching as Deku would yank it right towards Aizawa. Aizawa seeing him rush towards him, immediately yielding, knowing that if he didn't, he was dead. Deku seeing this slams the attack into the floor, cards cracking and drilling into the floor about 2 meters before they stop. Deku deactivating his lightning style and staring at Aizawa, smirking and watching as Aizawa had a shocked look on his face, looking like he just saw a ghost. Seeing this, he shrugs and walks off, going to go get a drink before coming back, talking to each other and starting to train together. I kind of figured like they were closer in this what if, so I may as well make them train together. So all that afternoon, Deku and Aizawa would go at it, throwing straight hands, left, right, good night, getting Deku way better at close combat. Aizawa teaching him some moves and like getting Deku to copy it with the sharingan, teaching him some stuff with the scarf and stuff, and Loki just gone ham all that afternoon. This training would become like a regular occurrence for the next week or so. Deku in this time also evolving his sharingan, getting 2 tomoe instead of 1, and training with that with Aizawa the rest of that week, finding it a lot easier to learn new moves, finding it much easier to react to stuff, and Loki starting to get the better of Aizawa at hand-to-hand combat, training with it for the next week until the next event would be announced. This of course being the USJ visit. Also, if you didn't get that by the way, Aizawa pulled him out of class like after class to go spar by the way. In my mind, I think Aizawa would have seen that Deku like didn't really fight anyone in his class test, he kind of just ignored everyone. And due to that, I kind of think that Aizawa wanted to like test him, you know. In that time, they would have also gotten a lot closer to getting some like grievances off their chest, you know. Deku telling Aizawa about his parents' situation, how they died, and Aizawa telling Deku about his whole Shokumo situation, how he died. Kind of trauma bonding if anything. Kind of finding that, in all honesty, they're more similar than they thought. I don't know, in my mind, Aizawa was the closest thing to Itachi, so, you know, I kind of figured they'll train together. All that stuff happens, everyone goes back to school, yada yada, everyone gets onto the bus. As they load onto the bus, Deku would sit at the back, chilling and kind of like sitting on his phone, kind of doom scrolling, playing some Clash Royale or something like that, scrolling through Xehthers' channel until Froppy would talk up, asking first who everyone thought was the strongest, people debating over Deku versus Todoroki, Bakugo at the back trying to like fight his way into the conversation, until Froppy would once again speak up. Oh yeah, Midoriya, how does your quirk work? I've been thinking about it for a while now. Energy manipulation just doesn't feel right. You can shoot fire, you can make clones, and what'd you do to Ida last week? Deku like kind of explaining the basics of it, telling him all about how he like molds his energy into elements and stuff, before he gets saved by the bus coming to a stop. Everyone hopping out and walking into the USJ, looking around the place and being like, whoa. Sitting and listening as 13 would do a boring speech like usual. Deku in this timeline would actually be respectful, you know, sitting there very intently, listening to 13 like she was like a professor or something like that, giving her the utmost respect until he would sense something all of a sudden, looking left and right before locking straight in on Korigiri down the bottom, watching as he sees energy coming out of nowhere, twisting and turning to life before a bunch of energy signals come out. Deku staring down would see all of the villains coming out of the portals, having been the first one to notice them all together, looking straight towards Aizawa and telling him right away about it, which would of course lead to Aizawa jumping down the bottom, but this time he would call for Deku as well. In his mind, he's trained with Deku personally and he knows exactly what Deku can do, so if anything, Deku's more of a help than a harm in this situation, and knowing that, he allows it just once, calling for Deku as he jumps down the staircase. Deku jumping too as the rest of the students would be like put into one group by 13, activating his sharingan right away and putting it straight into the Tsutomi state, staring at all the villains flooding in front of him, looking straight ahead to see Aizawa already engaging in combat, running down as quick as he can before he too joins in. Deku and Aizawa would go crazy. You gotta remember, they've been training for the last week together, which doesn't seem like a long time, but because of the sharingan, Deku has Aizawa's fighting style like down to the centimeter pretty much, so Deku and Aizawa can fight along with each other really well, both of them rushing towards the fodder and running straight through them, looking like Madara versus like the Shinobi Alliance, you know, beating all the villains in droves as they come out the portals, hitting some crazy combos, Aizawa like jumping over as Deku would hit like a huge fireball jutsu right under him, using his throwing cards, using everything, smoke bombs, and just going crazy with Aizawa. As this happens though, Korigiri and Shigaraki would talk out the back. Damn pros, always quick to react. Oh well, we still have you, right? Nomu. Staring at the Nomu as Korigiri would start to like teleport up to the top. Deku watching as he warped away, seeing he made it all the way up to the top, immediately telling Aizawa about it. Watching from the bottom while fighting as Korigiri would separate the entire class, teleporting them all around to random spots in the USJ, the fire zone, the mudslide zone. Deku sees this right away, putting his hands up, looking around the place before putting his hands into like a plus sign, channeling his energy and summoning 7 clones next to himself, feeling a huge wave of fatigue coming over himself before his 7 clones dip. They all jump in separate directions, launching off of each one of the sections to go protect the class. Deku's real buddy locking back in on the fodder in front of him, now knowing that the others were taken care of. Like you would think, each clone would go out to each like section, one of the clones walking on the water on like the water section to go help Froppy and Mineta, one rushing over to the mountain section to see that Todoroki had already taken care of it, one going over to the fire section and seeing the tail bomb, and the other 4 rushing around to each of the other sections. As this happens, Deku would tell Aizawa every bit of information that he knows, telling him about where all the kids are, telling him about where his clones are, telling him about how many like villains and stuff there are, and telling him that it should be all fine before out of the corner of his eye he sees a fist coming straight towards his face. With the Tsutomi Sharingan active, he barely reacts in time, parrying it and barely moving out of the way as a gust of wind would shoot down towards where the fist was just at, sending a crack through the floor just through wind pressure alone. Deku's eyes going wide, his heart skipping a beat. Deku right away would try to jump out of the way, Aizawa looking over to see the fist of the Nomu right where Deku was, his eyes going wide too. What the hell's that thing? When did it get there? Staring on as Shigaraki in the back would start to tweak. Damn it, Nomu, how'd you miss? He was standing still. Whatever, just don't miss again. Nomu like screeching like an animal before cocking his fist back again, staring Deku down as Aizawa from the sidelines would cancel his quirk. Deku watching as the Nomu would slam another punch forward, this time a lot slower than the last one. Knowing Aizawa must have something to do with it, he makes the most out of it, jumping up and concentrating his energy right into his feet, flipping over the Nomu's punch and running right up his arm, jumping off of his shoulder before doing like a flip up in the air, doing like a backflip and a 180 midair, staring back at the Nomu before doing hand signs. Aizawa watching from the sidelines as Deku would land, taking a huge breath in before letting off the biggest fireball he's ever let off in his life, sending it straight towards the Nomu and watching it connect. Everyone in the USJ feeling the heat coming off the middle, Shigaraki from the back being like, what the hell was that? Watching as the Nomu is enveloped in a huge fireball, ground charred and air like wavy, you know. Deku landing right after this attack was sent and jumping backwards into a handspring, something in his body reacting for him as the Nomu would jump through the fireball, rising through the ashes and rushing straight towards him again, his body like charred and ashy and stuff. Still not regenerating because he doesn't have any regeneration quirks, just going off of straight instinct. The Nomu starts like screeching and stuff like that. Deku once again barely able to keep up as the Nomu would send a huge barrage of attacks right towards him. Aizawa, knowing he can't really do anything else, would just keep focusing on like the fodder, you know, keeping him out of Deku's way as Deku would go ham on the Nomu, running the ones, Deku trying to get as much damage on it as he can, flowing his energy throughout his entire body, trying to speed himself up and power himself up as much as he can. Doing this, he starts low-key getting used to its moves, pumping his energy around his body like blood, feeling himself awake in mid-fight. Like Sasuke versus Naruto at the Valley at the end, like the first one, Deku would unlock his next evolution mid-battle, unlocking his 3 Tomoe Sharingan. As he unlocks it, he sees the Nomu's punch coming right towards him, seeing him move almost like a normal person. Seeing this, a small grin comes over his face, weaving it and hitting the Nomu with a 1-2 attack right to its stomach, kicking it backwards again before rushing in. Because Deku finally has his 3 Tomoe, he can 100% keep up with the Nomu, seeing his movements and hanging with him a lot easier, getting in close and going blow for blow with him, hitting him with a cheeky like jutsu every now and then, blinding him and attacking his weak spots, just like trying everything, before finally jumping back and trying his trump card, staring the Nomu deep in the eyes and sending it straight into a genjutsu. The Nomu getting hit by this immediately freezes up, sitting dead still and staring off into the distance, Shigaraki in the back being like, What happened? Deku seeing this smiles, walking towards it and like going to assess it and stuff, going in and like looking at its burns from before, about to drop his guard until out of nowhere the Nomu would mindlessly swing at him, completely ignoring Deku's genjutsu and actually clipping him on the side of the face. Deku getting hit by this slams against the floor, rolling and tumbling before he catches himself with an earth style, centering himself and looking around the USJ. Low-key, that last attack rocked him, so if anything this was time to recover. He stared around his body, looking at it with the Sharingan, seeing his organs messed up, bones broken, and insides bleeding. As he looks down at himself, his fatigue hits. His eyes start to sting. He did have the 3 Tomoe Sharingan, but he wasn't used to it yet. Plus, he just used a hell of a lot of energy just keeping up with the Nomu just then. Deku, now kinda tired, looks at the Nomu, looking as it mindlessly stares back at him, all of its charred bits falling off of its body, a couple of its fingers like burnt off and stuff, with hella like scratches all over its body. He looks over towards Aizawa, seeing Aizawa like mid-battle. He knew Aizawa couldn't keep it quirkless for much longer. Deku, seeing this, knows he's gotta finish it, locking in and finding his resolve, activating his Sharingan again and staring the Nomu down, starting to make hella hand signs in front of him as Shigaraki would stare him down. Nomu, what are you doing? Kill him already! Watching as the Nomu rushes in once more, jumping up and swinging violently towards Deku, who finally finishes his hand signs. As the Nomu punches, Deku weaves, ducking about a centimeter left of the Nomu's arm before sending his own punch. Midair, he sees the Nomu's pathways, getting a closer look at its body. Getting up and close, he sees its insides too, muscles in spots that are not supposed to be there, veins not connected, and organs that are stitched up at best. Seeing this, he knows right away this thing isn't human. Locking in and activating the jutsu that he was charging before as he punches. The USJ goes silent as the air around Deku flickers to life, lightning flicking off Deku's entire arm. It zaps away at the Nomu as Deku sends his punch forward, coating his entire arm in chakra and lightning, sending a punch that goes straight through the Nomu's arm, cutting it clean in half and slamming the Nomu in the head. The Nomu feels this, looking down at his arm to see it was already half gone. Immediately, it starts flailing around, burnt, shocked, and now bleeding. Kogiri and Shigaraki from the sidelines are shocked seeing this. That kid, he got the better of the Nomu. Damn it, Nomu. What's happening? There's no way this kid's stronger than the Nomu. You're built to break all mine. Shigaraki would just start tweaking as Deku would start to help Aizawa out. The two of them start like chipping away at the fodder villains, boxing up with them for about 10 seconds and not even thinking about the Nomu. He thought it was dead already, so it was just out of his mind. As he does this though, Aizawa would blink, figuring Deku got the better of the villain. This blink allowing the Nomu to finally start regenerating again. Shigaraki watching as the once dead Nomu kicks back to life again. Shigaraki seeing this smiles. Finally, Nomu, now, go for the pro this time. He was the one that made you lose to that brat. As soon as the Nomu hears this, it locks in on Aizawa, watching as they fought the fodder in front of him, getting up slowly before cracking the floor under it. Deku, halfway through fighting someone with like a scorpion quirk or something, would turn having heard this, looking over and searching the area before getting distracted by something, getting distracted by all of his clones' information coming back at him, feeling all the knowledge that they gained coming back into his mind. Through this, he right away knows that all the kids were safe and they were already out of the USJ actually, smiling and finally looking over to where the noise was, only to see nothing but a crack. As soon as he sees this, his eyes go wide. That was where the Nomu was. Seeing this, he immediately puts the Sharingan on, turning his head and just seeing the Nomu running top speed at Aizawa. And along with that, the Nomu had its quirks again, so it was a lot quicker than it was before, throwing its fists like an animal and about 30 centimeters away from connecting. Seeing this, Deku's eyes go wide. He couldn't use genjutsu. He couldn't cast a jutsu that quick, and he wouldn't make it in time. Knowing he can't do anything, he throws his arm out, doing nothing but watching as the Nomu's arm travels forward, traveling closer and closer to Aizawa's face before getting about 5 centimeters away from it, damn near connecting until boom! Everyone goes silent, looking up to where the sound came from only to see nothing. Deku, still staring at Aizawa, sees someone appearing out of nowhere, movements too quick to even track with his 3 Tomoe sharingan. He feels the ground shake, looking around him and seeing the USJ glass shatter, looking away for only a split second before looking back, seeing someone standing there, holding Nomu's punch completely still midair. Deku, seeing this, drops to the floor, his sharingan deactivating by itself, life energy completely drained out of him, slumping down and watching from a distance as All Might would begin to fight the Nomu. If it wasn't for All Might, Deku and Aizawa would have been cooked. Deku watches from a distance as All Might tussles with the Nomu, watching weakly for about a minute before passing out midway through, waking up to glimpses of the battle before going back to sleep again. A bloody and tired Aizawa walks up to Deku on the sidelines, picking him up and looking back at the battle. Kid, this is not our fight. Let's just leave it to him. Come on, let's go. Putting him on his back and bringing him up the stairs, looking back and seeing All Might and the Nomu still going at it. Loki, if anything, Aizawa and Deku are both lucky to be alive at all. The USJ incident wrapping up from there, Shigaraki gets teleported away like you would think. The Nomu was beat by All Might, and unlike regular, no one's hurt too bad in this timeline. Deku's clones saved a lot of the kids from injury. The only two that were really hurt being Aizawa and Deku. Deku being out cold for a day or two in the hospital until he wakes up, staring around him to see police, Aizawa and his mum staring back at him. As he fades to life, he slowly gets up and looks around him, kind of like blinking a couple of times until all of them start asking him questions all at once. You gotta remember, because Deku had his clones out at this point, Deku knows 10 times what anyone else knows. When all the students got interviewed after the USJ incident by like the police and stuff, all of them said the exact same thing. Deku helped them out. And due to that, all the police and stuff have been waiting for Deku to wake up this entire time. Deku, hearing all the questions and stuff, sighs and immediately gets up, going to stretch and like get his blood flowing around his legs and stuff, before going straight from the hospital straight to the police station. Now the police would question him for a solid like 4 hours straight, getting every minute detail about like the USJ incident, the Nomu, what Shigaraki looked like, getting Deku to like pick out a couple of suspects that he thought that he knew, just anything. Deku giving him a lot of information in this time. His clones weren't just fighting, they were getting info as well, using genjutsu on people to get like the main ringleaders and stuff, giving the police all the info they want to know plus more, and then talking to them about the Nomu. This chat goes on all of that afternoon, Deku being let out late that night and going home and finding he had next week's school off to study. UA giving the students the next week off to like, you know, kind of get over the USJ incident. Deku with his time trying to focus on keeping his 3 Tomoe active as long as he could, using it constantly all that week and getting it to a point where he could use it for hours at a time now, the USJ being a constant reminder of his weakness, pushing him further and further into his training. Doing his own thing until about the 4th day in, where he would get a knock on the door, opening it to see Aizawa, seeing him with a different look on his face. They go down to their normal training spot and like you would think start to spar, this time talking while they were doing so. They speak about how they felt about the USJ, Deku getting how weak he felt of his chest, with Aizawa actually agreeing in this timeline. Aizawa, having seen the Nomu's fist so close to his face before All Might saved him, was just like shell-shocked. He knew in that moment that he could have died, and Xehther's got a whole new outlook on everything. The two of them going on and on about this, chatting, training, getting all their grievances and angers out too. Eventually he goes back to school after the week off and right away knows what was happening. This of course being the sports festival. Nezu, like in canon, would think it was a good idea to run the sports festival, and because they didn't have as many injuries as they did in canon, I kind of figured they would be doing it in this timeline too. Deku seeing the sports fest set up is low-key kind of excited. Him and his friends at the old orphanage used to always watch the sports festival, so finally being a part of it felt really weird. He makes his way through the hallways of UA, turning the hallway, walking down a concrete path before making his way to the UA stadium. Before he goes into the digouts, he looks around the place, seeing all the heroes lining the stadium, seeing a couple of celebrity guests, before seeing all the people that came to watch. The stadium was packed. He could feel all the people cheering from above. With a big smile on his face, he walks back, walking down a hallway before eventually making it to the digout of Class 1A, opening the door and turning to the corner, stretching a little bit in the corner before someone comes up to him. This of course being Bakugo. Hey Deku! Deku like stops and looks at him. I didn't need your help at the USJ, damn Deku. I was fine by myself. Deku being like, whatever Bakugo, until Bakugo starts pressing him more. I'm being for real Deku, stay out of my business, this is war. Exploding some stuff in his palms before walking off, the entire class feeling the tension between the two of them. Deku low-key ignoring him, getting up before walking out, walking completely past Bakugo as midnight would finally call them out. Like you would think they do the whole like ceremony thing, introducing all the classes, all the students, before eventually Eventually, Deku was called up to do the speech in this time. Deku cracking a grin before looking back at Bakugo, walking up to the front and grabbing onto the mic. I don't really care what he says, and I don't really know what he's gonna say, but he does some like Itachi stuff. Again, I don't really know what that is. After which, Midnight calls out the contestants to do their first event. This, of course, being the obstacle course. Deku seeing this has a big smile on his face. You gotta remember, ninjas are built for this stuff. They jump through trees and stuff in Naruto all the time, so running through something like this is a breeze. Right away, Deku would get to the front of the line, looking to the left of him and seeing Bakugo before looking to the right and seeing Todoroki. Seeing this, he smiles a little bit, looking to the floor before activating his sharingan. As he does so, he sees Todoroki's foot glowing, a small faint shine coming from his foot. Kinda confused before he looks to his left, seeing the same glimmer on Bakugo's hands, with Bakugo's hands glowing a little bit more of like a rough and like sandpaper texture almost. Seeing this, he's mad confused. He'd never seen anything like this before. Kind of entranced a little bit, distracted so much that he actually misses the starter pistol. Watching and seeing as the other two shoot before him, sprinting off in front of him as the floor below him starts to get cold. Deku with his Sharingan active stares at this on instinct, seeing his tiny little ice crystals start forming on the floor, immediately knowing what was about to happen. Before it does though, Deku puts his hand up, putting his hand into the clone jutsu and summoning another clone in front of him, putting his hand out and getting yanked out by the clone before everyone's feet below him gets frozen. Deku not even looking backwards before he sprints off. He sees the two in front of him and now he was pissed. Like in the USJ, he starts flowing his energy right around his body, flowing it through his body like blood, kind of using it like Tsunade and like Sakura, you know, getting a huge amp to his speed, jumping up and running at about like 10% one full speed. It's nothing too crazy, running with his hands behind him and going top speed. This is where he runs into his first obstacle, this of course being like the 1, 2 and 3 pointer robots. Deku seeing this is about to fight until he sees the other two completely dodging it. They knew he was hot on their tail and due to that they didn't want to take any chances. Seeing this, Deku completely dips too, leaving the 1, 2 and 3 pointers for the people behind him, which would lead him to the 0 pointers next. Now unlike the 1, 2 and 3 pointers, he had to do something about these 0 pointers. He looks forward as a big smile grows on his face. There were 3 robots, huh? Looking to his left and seeing Bakugo exploding up to the head of one, seeing Todoroki on the right charging up his ice attack, which just left one in the middle. Seeing this, he knows he's got to go in, looking it over with the Sharingan and finding like all of its weak spots, looking for all of its joints before he starts to make some hand signs, staring them all down as Todoroki completely freezes his and Bakugo explodes his to hell. Looking at this, he smiles, finishing his hand signs before taking a huge breath in, summoning a clone next to him as it too takes a huge breath in, getting as much air as they possibly can before breathing out. Deku breathing out a huge line of fire before the clone next to him breathes out a huge line of wind. Everyone watching confused at first, watching as the fire and the wind don't combine well, kind of like murmuring a little bit until it would start to spin, looking like a tornado almost, combining in the middle and supercharging the fire. Because of all the air that just got added to it, it begins to burn hella bright. People in the crowd being like, oh my eyes, before it connects with the 0 pointer. Deku adding a third clone next to him to add more wind, which powers the fire up so much it starts to boil through the 0 pointer, frying some of its circuits and making it collapse before him. Seeing this, he runs completely casually past it, the 2 clones next to him disappearing as he keeps going. Bakugo and Todoroki up the front hearing it collapse, looking back and being like, show off, before they all keep on running. Like you would think they would then go to like that gap thing that they have like the ropes going over, that big ass pit, which I'm gonna be honest, Deku's gonna have to climb over because I don't see him doing anything else really. Though he's not slow or anything, I'd say he's about Eater's pace at this. Getting over there and being about 20 meters behind Bakugo and Todoroki, who had already started fighting up the front. Seeing this, he smiles, looking around him and seeing what the next obstacle was. This of course being the final thing, the minefield. Now unlike everyone else, Deku has a Sharingan, so he can see exactly where the mines are. He can see where things have been dug up, seeing like the energy left from people, and thus he knows exactly where to go. Rushing in and using his agility to his advantage, outrunning the bombs behind him and just going ham. Todoroki and Bakugo up the front start fighting until they hear what happens behind them. Looking back and seeing Deku running full speed towards them with a hell of bombs going off behind him. Seeing this, their eyes go wide. Damn it, Deku, why'd you have to drag us into this? Both of them start going crazy, you know. Todoroki completely disregarding like who's behind him and like freezing the entire thing in front of him, and Bakugo using max explosions, even if it means exploding the things behind him. And due to that, the 3 of them would run neck and neck, fighting between each other as there were about 10 meters left. Running as quick as they can as Deku would start making a hand sign, rolling on the floor about 4 meters away before slamming his hand down, using it to like handspring himself up as a huge mud wall would come up from below him, blocking the other two and slamming their faces into it. Both of them kind of rocked by this as Deku would run through the finish line, getting first place. I'm gonna say Bakugo gets second and Todoroki gets third, of course. Both of them looking at Deku pissed. That was a dog move, Deku. Todoroki being like, yeah, you're done in the 1v1. Deku kind of waving them off as the rest of the people would come through the finish line, getting their final like 20 people or something like that, and eventually going to the cavalry battle. I'm gonna be real, I'm not doing the cavalry battle. That's boring. Deku of course winning. I mean, you can just put like people into genjutsu if he really wants to, and he can just use like mud walls or something like that, I don't know. Eventually getting into the 1v1 portion. which would be the exact same as Ginkanen, with Deku's first match being against Shinso. A very bad matchup for Shinso if I'm being honest. Deku sitting at the dugouts looks at his opponent, looking at the screen where it showed his name. Shinso, huh? I don't think I've ever seen that kid before. He tries to remember back, still seeing nothing. Getting low-key kind of confused by this. Who the hell was this kid? He knew Shinso had to be strong if he made it this far, and due to that, I don't think Deku would hold back anything. Deku distracted by this as Aizawa would call his name out, calling him out to the stage and getting him ready for the first match. Deku of course walking out the dugouts before walking out to the stage. He looks around him, seeing all the crowd cheering for him, seeing a couple people holding up a sign and stuff with his name on it before he locks back in, walking up the staircase and meeting Shinso in the middle of the arena. Like you would think, Midnight would be have a good match, doing all that match stuff before the two of them would be separated. Deku makes his way to the edge of the stage, getting into his fighting stance and staring Shinso down. Shinso does the same thing, staring him directly in the eyes as Deku would activate his sharingan. Smile growing on both of their faces as Midnight would put her hand up, pulling the gun before immediately Shinso starts to shit talk, trying to get under Deku's skin, sitting dead still and continuing to talk, going on and on about how Deku's blessed and how strong he is. Deku not really caring at all until Shinso would bring up his mama. Now Deku doesn't play about his mama. She was always there for him in his eyes, and due to that, Deku would have to respond, opening his mouth and starting to talk. Hell no, you take that! Shinso in the crowd looking as Deku froze up, Shinso smirking and staring him down. Simply outplayed. Now, go ahead and walk off the stage for me. Deku under his brainwashing would of course do so, out of control of his body, turning around and starting to walk off. The crowd seeing this goes nuts, Present Mike being like, "What? The top runner, Azuka Midoriya! It seems Shinso has caught him under his trap." The crowd going completely nuts, watching Deku about 2 steps away from the sideline. He takes one final step until he would freeze. Shinso noticing the buzzer going off in the background, he looks over to Deku. What? Why are they calling it? He isn't even looking down and seeing himself on the grass. Eyes going wide as he looks back up again. As he does, he looks at the crowd, seeing them all completely still. No movement, no cheering, no noise. Looking up at the sky and seeing the birds were frozen in time. Clouds completely stagnant before he looked at the sun, seeing as it slowly blackened. Kind of like the infinite tsukyomi, the sun would start to twist, turning a bloodshot red, black markings spreading and spinning before looking straight back at him. Looking like the sky had a huge eye staring back at him. As he sees this, he takes a huge breath in, chill going down his spine as he reawakens in the real world, seeing Deku looking down on him from the ring, looking down at the floor before collapsing, breathing heavy, feeling the grass on his hands, looking back up to the sun, to the sky, seeing them finally back to normal, holding his head before looking back up at Deku, locking eyes with him as it all clicks. You did this. He starts to scurry away before Deku tells him to chill, walking down the stairs of the ring and helping Shinso up before explaining what happened to him, taking him up to Recovery Girl before sitting up there and explaining the entire story. Deku being like, "It's just my quirk." He tells him how similar their quirks are, telling him how, if anything, it was just kind of a bad matchup. Shinso in a cold sweat laying down in the infirmary as Deku would leave, about to face his second opponent. This of course being Todoroki, a fight that would be much better than Deku versus Shinso. Also, I don't think Deku's going to be using Genjutsu after this. Genjutsu is just boring if I'm being honest. Imagine being an audience member and just seeing someone just drop. That's the entire fight. They came here for hands, and thus Deku has to give them some. As they walk out to this stage, the entire crowd goes nuts. Deku had been a huge fan favorite this entire time, but so had Todoroki, the number 2 hero's son. All of his mates in the orphanage cheer him on as he walks up to the stage, staring Todoroki down. Todoroki, like you would think, would stare him back, this time tweaking because of his dad, and due to that, I don't think he would be holding back a single thing. Still kind of angry like in the Zero fight, you know? Midnight on the sidelines puts her hand up, looking at the two of them before nodding, pulling the trigger and starting the match. As she does so, Todoroki would send out a huge glazer of ice right towards Deku. Deku rushing right while pulling out some hand signs, hitting him really quick before slamming his hand down. Like in the obstacle course, a huge mud wall comes in front of him, blocking Todoroki's view as he makes more hand signs. Smile growing on his face as he takes a huge breath in. Todoroki completely unaware until Deku jumps from above the wall, sending a massive fireball towards him, breathing out for a solid 10 seconds straight. Concrete below him cracks, metal support beams melt and stuff, with Cementos on the sidelines stopping in and doing damage control. Todoroki barely sees this, blocking with a huge wall of ice once more, hitting it and sending out hella steam as a result. As this fire attack goes off, Deku rushes in, seeing Todoroki had dodged and was going left. Seeing this, Deku rushes in, concentrating and pushing his energy around himself, flowing it from his head to his toes and completely covering himself. Once again, it kind of works like Tsunade and like Sakura, you know, having actually based it off of All Might's quirk, having seen All Might use his quirk back at the USJ. As he does this, his body pulsates with energy. Deku putting his hands out in front of him and summoning 2 clones next to him. Todoroki, still lost from the steam and smoke from that last attack, stares around desperately, constantly keeping himself on guard. Seeing his smoke moves from the left, Todoroki stares as Deku rushes towards him, sending a huge open right hook straight at his head, one that Deku threw with weirdly off form. Todoroki, seeing this, goes in for the counter, stepping in and sending out a pillar straight at him, to his surprise hitting him dead on, freezing Deku in the pillar before he would vanish. Deku appearing once more, this time to his right, hitting Todoroki in the liver before kicking him straight towards the out of bounds line. Todoroki barely keeping himself in with ice, in his own head kind of tweaking, watching on as another Deku would appear, this one being the real one. Deku and his clan were rushing at Todoroki, keeping the distance short and running straight combos on him. Todoroki barely keeping up with it until someone from the crowd would distract him, this of course being Endeavor, screaming out, "Dodge, Shoto, dodge!" Todoroki looking up into the crowd, which would give Deku the opening he needed to go straight in for hands. Deku and the clone straight start piecing Todoroki up, straight up jumping him, not giving him a single second to think, jumping him like Nanami and Yuji jumped Mahito, you know. One Deku dodging down as another slams Todoroki in the face, kneeing him in the gut on the way down as the other Deku would push him over. Like, it's bad, it's filthy. Todoroki getting hit so hard he goes straight into his backstory, in his head thinking of his entire life, his mum, his siblings, back to that incident back when he was a kid, that one All Might episode he was watching, you know, spacing out as Deku goes back in. Deku solo rushing now, sweeping Todoroki's legs out before spinning and hitting him in the stomach with a massive kick. In the air, Todoroki wakes back up, that kick hurting him so much that he got brought back to the living plane, getting every single ounce of air kicked out of his body, doing like the whole thing, flying up in the air after getting kicked and getting desperate, getting pissed and staring at Deku, who was still charging in. As he stared, his anger grew, forcing something to activate his quirk. Deku in the crowd watching as Todoroki lit up into flames, staring like a maniac, huge smile on his face. He looked at Todoroki with the sharingan active, seeing his entire body pulsating with energy, smile creeping over his face as he starts to do hella hand signs. Todoroki landing and starting to like charge up his final attack before it would all come crashing down. Unlike in canon, Deku didn't do his whole "it's your quirk," that whole thing, and thus right after Todoroki would get hit, he would just deactivate his flames. I don't see him like fighting Deku with them. He has no motivation to, and if anything, he's kind of disgusted in himself for using him in general, deactivating it and getting jumped and eventually getting knocked out by Deku. Kind of lame, but a win's a win, which means Deku would of course be going to the finals against Bakugo. Bakugo back in the digouts with a huge smile on his face, exploding his palms and like looking at a picture of Deku. Damn Deku, I'm gonna beat your ass in front of everyone. Getting warmed up until eventually the two of them are called out, the crowd going crazy. I mean, it is the finals of the UA Sports Festival, and them two are crazy strong. People cheering and not stopping for like 2 minutes, 3 minutes straight. Finally hushing down a little bit as Aizawa would begin to introduce both of them, telling everyone their quirks before Midnight would start to explain the rules again, doing the whole like, ring is out thing, before eventually raising her hand up into the air, looking at the both of them and getting a nod before looking at the middle of the arena, finger on the trigger before she would shoot. As this happens, Bakugo would shoot right in, rushing straight towards Deku, not caring in the slightest if he got in close, which is something that Deku was pretty much itching for. As soon as Bakugo comes in, he sends one of them huge right hand explosions, lighting it off and shaking the ground beneath them, watching as Deku to his surprise would duck under it, activating his sharingan halfway through as he grabs onto his hand, putting his arm over his shoulder and throwing him over his shoulder like he does in canon, this time putting some force behind it, slamming Bakugo on the floor so hard that he bounces up, getting a good 30 centimeters off the floor again before Deku starts making hella hand signs super quick. Bakugo's like, oh, still kind of hurting off that last attack, distracted in midair as Deku would slam his hands onto the floor, getting a huge mud wall to kick Bakugo up into the air. As this happens, Deku looks up, tracing his movements with Sharingan and seeing as Bakugo's hands were about to light up again. So he's about to use his quirk, huh? Smiling and once again starting to make hella hand signs, doing like a before putting his hands in front of his face, staring Bakugo down and taking a huge breath in, breathing out and spraying water all over Bakugo and all over the ring. People in the stadium feeling this, people in the crowd feeling this too, being like, oh, what was that for? Looking and seeing that Bakugo was now soaked, sending off little explosions from his hands that were barely lighting up. Bakugo still kind of rocked from that last attack, like, oh, damn it, Deku! Shaking his hands off and sending off huge explosions in his hands, trying to like dry his hand off, which would actually work, getting it to a point where Bakugo could use his explosions again. Slowly lowering himself to the floor again again as Deku would rush in again. Now, unlike before, Bakugo does not want to go in close. He knows what happened last time. He got swamped. He didn't even know what was happening to him. He was just like on the floor 1 second and up in the air the next. And due to that, Bakugo would stay backwards, trying to charge up like AP shots towards Deku, sending off bigger and bigger chain explosions like da-da-da-da right towards Deku, trying to like keep his distance, you know, which would bore Deku. He stares Bakugo down, activating his sharingan and beginning to put his hand up. Bakugo like starting to get ready, like exploding some small explosions, trying to like warm his hand up before Deku would just point at him, doing nothing but pointing. Smile growing on his face as Bakugo gets pissed. Damn it, Deku, why don't you attack anymore? Starting to get pissed and they're like, whatever then. Exploding in towards Deku and starting to go like, da-da-da-da-da, you know, ramping up his explosions, spamming him towards Deku and seeing that Deku actually doesn't move, sitting completely still, sitting with that shit-eating grin on his face. Bakugo confused goes in, spinning like a howitzer impact before setting a huge explosion towards Deku, to his horror actually connecting with Deku's arm and sending it straight through his body. Watching as Deku's face goes from happy to pain for about half a second before Deku disappears into crows in front of him, body exploding into crows that begin to fly behind him, joining himself together again at another Deku that pointed towards Bakugo again. Bakugo is staring back towards Deku as Deku would begin to grin. Damn it, Deku, why don't you attack anymore? Starting to get pissed and they're like, whatever then. Exploding in towards Deku and starting to go like, da-da-da-da-da, you know, connecting with Deku once again and seeing that he exploded into crows again. Watching as once more they fly behind him, pointing back at him and cracking a grin. Now, if you didn't get it already, Bakugo is trapped in a loop, he's stuck in Groundhog Day, and he is cooked pretty much. Deku's already won the fight. Deku's sitting completely still in the real world as Bakugo jumps around like a lunatic. Midnight and Cementos looking at this from the sidelines are kind of like, should we call it already? Deku's sitting there and smiling. Nah, let him have some fun first. Watching on as Bakugo continue to thrash around, still in his dream world fighting Deku, completely unaware of what's happening around him. Going on for like a minute straight until Bakugo in his dream world would finally start to realize what was happening, hearing the same events happening over and over and over again, starting to go a little bit nuts, you know. Bakugo in his head remembering back to what Aizawa said back at like the quirk apprehension test, remembering back to Aizawa saying if he got one more step closer to Deku, he wouldn't have been able to hold him back. Them words ring around Bakugo's head. This is what he meant. Let me out of this damn bind, shit, Deku. Lowkey tweaking a little bit until Midnight would decide to call the fight. Deku, of course, winning. I mean, he stomped him in hand-to-hand and in the genjutsu. There was zero way Bakugo was going to win this. And due to that, Deku would be getting his gold medal after waking Bakugo up from his genjutsu, which of course would be like a big event. Bakugo tweaking as soon as he came out of it, staring at Deku and like starting to rush back at him again, having to get All Might called down to like hold him back before he eventually puts him in that same like collar and chain shit they had him in canon and like tied him up, doing the award ceremony before eventually getting home that night, sleeping the night off before going into school the next day, seeing a huge binder on his desk in front of him, sighing and getting right into reading it. Like you would think, he puts a sharingan on and just like flicks through every single page, reading it like he's a Flash or something like that, getting to the end and finding one name that stood out to him the most, ticking it and smiling before going to get ready, getting his stuff together and meeting him at the agency the next day. This of course being Aizawa. I mean, who else? Looking around the place before looking at Aizawa. Well, isn't this nice? I see you're quite the architect. Someone stepping out from the back of Aizawa and like giggling. This of course being Shinso. If you don't remember, Shinso went to Aizawa's agency. And thus for the next week, Aizawa, Deku, and Shinso would all be training together. All of them sparring together. Deku and Shinso running some hands too. Aizawa and Deku trying to teach Shinso like the scarf thing before they eventually go patrolling. Like you would think Deku would stop a couple people with like genjutsu. I don't think Aizawa would like let him fight or anything because, you know, he doesn't have a license or anything yet, but I think genjutsu's fair game. He would take a couple photos with some fans and stuff because like the sports festival. Chilling until about the 4th day of the work study. Deku and Shinso on this day being taken out to Hosu, which I don't know if that usually happens, but it does in this timeline. Aizawa wanted to go like shopping or something like that, I don't know. This landing him around the same spot where Deku was in canon. Chilling on the train on the way home until the Nomu would come and kick the door in. Looking around the place and starting to like thrash around. Aizawa and Deku right away acting. Aizawa jumping up and cancelling its quirk as Deku would jump towards it. Sweeping its legs out before drop kicking it right out of the train. The two of them not even needing to talk, rushing right after it. Aizawa grabbing it with a scarf as Deku would start to make some hand signs. Taking a huge breath in as they both land. Deku landing straight on top of the Nomu before he slams it with a fire attack straight towards his head. He wasn't taking any chances, especially after the Nomu at the USJ. Aizawa watching as the Nomu's head was completely gone, floor under it charred and ashy from where Deku just hit his attack. Looking at him kinda concerned before looking up, noticing it wasn't just that one Nomu. Around him he saw pandemonium, like about 7 Nomus, all the pros in the area like trying to fight him off, bins knocked over, just absolute carnage, like fire everywhere. Seeing this, they both immediately lock in, rushing over to the nearest sign of distress and starting to fight another Nomu. This Nomu being the one one that Manuel was fighting in the anime, you know. Aizawa cancelling his quirk as Manuel would start to shoot some water towards it. Damn it, Ida, where did you go? Deku's ears like perking up as he sees that Manuel was kind of distressed. Finishing the Nomo off before he tells Aizawa what he heard. Aizawa being like, it'll be fine, until Deku rushes off himself. Aizawa about to go after him until another Nomo would appear, kind of distracting him as Deku would run off, looking through each and every alleyway, looking through every single street, asking people around if they've seen him, even looking at like footprints on the floor, eventually finding where Ida was, finding him just in time to see Stain about to stab him, staring at him as his eyes would go wide, feeling his killer intent and knowing he wasn't playing around. Right away he grabs something out of his pocket. A shuriken, throwing it straight towards Stain's sword and knocking it away just in time. Stain would stab down next to Ida, barely missing him as Deku would rush in. Stain looking up just in time to see Deku's leg already straight in front of his face, slamming a kick against him so hard it slams him against the wall, spinning and looking like Saji, jumping up into the air before slamming him in the stomach again, pushing him back about 5 meters. Seeing he had some time, he right away picks Ida up, rushing him away until Stain lets off some bloodlust, staring Deku down and grabbing a knife before throwing it dead at his head. Deku, feeling this happen, would grab a small kunai from like a little pouch on his side, putting it on his finger and started to like flick it around a little bit before it lands into his palm. Putting it right behind his head instinctively as the knife that Stain threw would clink against it, dropping against the floor as Deku would slowly turn, staring at Stain as Stain would start to do his whole false heroes should be culled, you know, that whole like thing. About to do something until Deku would move first, activating his sharingan while keeping eye contact before throwing his kunai right over the air in front of Stain. Stain continuing to rush in, jumping over walls and stuff before Deku would meet in the middle. The two of them would box like throwing straight hands. Deku with his sharingan active is keeping up with him easily, finding and exploiting every single one of his openings with a sneaky punch, and low-key keeping Stain on the back foot even with like all his knives and stuff. Finally seeing as the kunai that he threw from before began to fall. As he sees this, a smile grows on his face, Deku concentrating, putting his chakra into the soles of his feet before jumping up into the air. Like you would think, Deku would run up the wall, flipping before slamming the kunai with a kick. The kunai shoots towards Stain's face, nicking him on the cheek before cutting him slightly. Deku looking down on him. Stain seeing this knows he's outclassed, grabbing onto a throwing knife and chucking it right towards Deku midair, trying to run away right after. Deku would see the knife coming straight towards him, looking off in the distance and seeing Stain running full speed, just straight up booking it, checking back every now and then before he slams into a brick wall in front of him. Stain feeling this is like, oh, what the hell? Still kind of stressing about running before he looks up, looking and seeing that the brick wall he just ran into was All Might. All Might stood staring down at him, seeing this time he wasn't smiling. Stain seeing this starts tweaking, being like, All Might, Seeing All Might look into the alleyway, All Might sees the weapons everywhere, blood splattered and students injured, looking back towards him with a sick look on his face. You did this? Stain being like, yes, All Might, I did it for you. I did it all for you. Kind of starting to get psychotic a little bit until he starts to grovel, going towards All Might's feet and starting to like bow down to him, you know, looking back up to see All Might staring back, staring directly into his soul and not looking away, not even blinking. Stain slowly getting the feeling that something was wrong, looking around him and starting to tweak out a little bit. Like Shinso in the sports festival, everything was frozen. As this happens, Deku would be helping Ida out, getting him to an ambulance along with the other pro heroes before starting to talk to Aizawa, telling him what happened before, starting to point towards like a mumbling Stain who stared at a brick wall and stuff, with Aizawa cracking a grin. Well, damn kid, fair enough. I can't even hate. Staring over to Stain, who was still in his little dream world talking to All Might. So Stain got put in a genjutsu. That entire fight was genjutsu, by the way, if you didn't realize. When he locked eyes with Stain, it was GG. Like, that's it. Aizawa wondering the whole time what would have happened if Deku wasn't there, putting it to the back of his mind before going to help with the police and stuff. Deku talking to Ida, who was about to be rushed off as someone on the rooftop would finally notice them. This, of course, being Shigaraki, who stares Deku and Aizawa down. It's them! Korigiri, it's them! Korigiri like looking around before looking down. It's that damn Aizawa and that damn kid. If I could kill him, I would. Just starting to tweak like an actual maniac before calling All For One. All For One picks up completely silent before Shigaraki would start to speak. Master, I found the brat I wanted dead. Please, Master, I need power. All For One talking to Korigiri a little bit, being like, can you confirm, Korigiri? Before he grows a big smile. Fine, you're in luck. The good doctor has one that he's been itching to let loose for a while now. Korigiri, I'll send you the coordinates now. Shigaraki smiling and laughing too. Finally, that brat! I'll kill him and All Might. Then this corrupt hero society will burn to the floor. Smiling and laughing as something would begin to come through Shigaraki's portals. slowly looking around its surroundings before Shigaraki speaks up. Well, the doctor's outdone himself this time. The doctor coming over the phone he was holding. Yes, this is one of my greatest masterpieces. I call it Hood, the high-end Nomu. The high-end stands out and looks around himself, doing the whole, do I fight? Shigaraki laughing before pointing. Them, Hood, kill them first. Then I give you free reign over this city. You can burn it to ashes for all I care. Laughing like a maniac before Shigaraki and Korogiri would dip, being like, let's get out of here. Watching over a camera or something as Hood would lock in on Deku and Aizawa. Deku, who was next to Aizawa, begins to feel strange, feeling like someone or something was watching him. Warning Aizawa about it until he hears a scream off in the distance. Going to look before he sees a huge stretched out arm shooting right towards them, about a meter away from his face. Deku, seeing this, pushes Aizawa out the way, barely dodging in time, eyes going wide as he activates the sharingan, staring Hood down as his arms come back to him. Aizawa on the floor getting up, brushing himself off before looking up. What was seeing Hood up in the air about 50 meters away, staring them down and floating menacingly. The two of them stare back, Deku immediately trying to use Genjutsu on him. Seeing his head would go limp for about half a second, falling before locking back in again. This time Hood grows a smile on its face, staring down at Deku in particular before releasing about 8 Nomus all over the place, spreading them all over the city and distracting all the nearby pros before he starts to fly straight towards Deku. Deku, seeing this, looks towards Aizawa. You ready? Staring as Aizawa would begin to nod, both of them looking back at Hood as Aizawa would cancel its quirks. Both of them immediately rushing in too as Hood would begin to fall from the sky, kind of like ragdolling before slamming onto the floor, locking back in and rushing straight towards the two of them. I'm going to assume Hood has Nomu level strength, if not stronger, for this what if, by the way, and due to that, Hood would come rushing. Noticing it was quirkless, it rushes in using straight hands, throwing a fist straight towards Deku, which to his surprise would be dodged. Deku like parrying the fist before he jumps on top of it, running up his arm as Aizawa grab onto his fist using his like scarf, trying to hold his head down as Deku would start to make some hand signs, staring the Nomu's head straight down before breathing in, opening his mouth wide and breathing straight out, sending a huge attack of fire straight towards the Nomu's head. Watching us through the smoke, his Sharingan would pick something up, this being the Nomu who'd already had a counter attack ready. Slamming a fist straight through the fire indiscriminately and clipping Deku on the side, spinning him a little bit and sending him flying straight towards the floor. The Nomu yanking its hand back and like flinging Aizawa away. As Deku was rolling on the floor, the Nomu starts to lock in on Aizawa, knowing that Deku had some other type of quirk and that Aizawa was the one that was taking his quirks away. Knowing this, the Nomu would rush straight towards him, bringing his arm back before he's about to slam it forward. Deku's eyes going wide, remembering back to the USJ. He couldn't have a repeat of that. As he was tumbling on the floor, he made a hand sign, this being the shadow clone hand sign, watching as 2 of his clones would come out of him, grabbing onto him while he was tumbling and this time throwing him forwards, redirecting him straight towards the Nomu as Deku would start to make some hand signs, finally finishing him up before slamming his hand onto the floor, getting it down just in time as the Nomu would slam its fist forward, watching as a mud wall would come up right underneath the Nomu's arm, clipping the Nomu's arm and just redirecting it away from Aizawa's face. Aizawa, seeing this, has his eyes go wide, watching as the Nomu cocks his other hand back, stacking on hella muscles onto it like before getting ready to slam another attack right towards Aizawa. Deku this time though is not ready. He watches on as the Nomu would fling his hand forward, barely missing Aizawa before it clips the car that was next to him. The car that got hit exploding on impact, floor next to Aizawa and building in front of him completely sliced in half, car like teching a little bit before it blows up next to the both of them. Deku watching as both Aizawa and the Nomu get flung backwards, seeing the Nomu char up a little bit before he begins regenerating again. Deku knowing right away that Aizawa must have closed his eyes, watching as the Nomu immediately would put them jetpack things back on, flying straight the hell out of there and getting away from Aizawa so he doesn't cancel his quirk again. Deku seeing this gets pissed, looking between Aizawa and the Nomu before rushing back over to Aizawa. As he rushes over, he sees Aizawa was decently fine, seeing that he had a couple of burns and stuff, but that was about it. Manual running over and like helping him up and stuff, with Deku looking straight back towards the Nomu again, knowing he had to do something. Knowing this, he rushes straight off, running after the Nomu, putting chakra on his feet and rushing up a wall in front of him, seeing as the Nomu would fly away, transforming its hands into like wings and start to flap away. Deku using his agility would like jump through alleyways and stuff, coating his feet in chakra and start to like jump between walls and stuff, rushing right after the Nomu as the Nomu would look back, smiling as his arm would start to bulk up again, this time a hell of a lot bigger than it did before, staring Deku down as his fingers start to twitch. Show me your strength. Sending its arm out with like a jet propulsor right on its like elbow. Deku in his head shocked. It can talk? there must be a difference between this one and the other one. Getting like a flashback to the USJ. Locking back in again and seeing the Nomu's arm flying towards him. He almost sees it in slow motion, watching as the Nomu's arm would like twist and contort midair, muscles bulking up on every inch of it, fingers twitching before hardening. Its arm about to slam into Deku until it splits, fingers splitting off into their own like little distinct little things, all going a different direction before running straight towards Deku again. Deku seeing this knows he's trapped, his sharingan analyzing everything around him, trying to find the best path out until he's got from behind. Nomu smiling off in the distance as his hand would start to wrap around Deku, kind of working like a black whip almost, wrapping around him and holding him tight, slinging his arm back into him before he starts to spin. Deku feeling himself getting rocketed in one direction before he slammed into a building behind him, covering himself in chakra just in time to tank the impact, going straight through the glass and tumbling on the floor, putting his chakra over his feet and his hands and just catching himself in time, looking around him and seeing people having dinner, all staring at him before they start to scream, all watching as the high-end Nomu floats menacingly, smile growing on his face once more before its arm starts to twitch, shooting to the side before shooting straight towards Deku. Deku this time blocking only to see its arm going straight past him, continuing and growing another about 50 meters or so. Seeing this, he's kind of confused, rushing towards the Nomu again until the Nomu's arm to the right of him would start to sharpen itself, the entire thing bulking up before twisting into a blade, propulsors like growing on every single part of its body as it starts to spin. Deku feeling a huge gust of wind go past him as he watches it cut clean, straight through the building he was in, straight through the building in front of him, and straight through a couple of skyscrapers behind him.
Heroes in the distance go crazy, eyes going wide as they stare off. Civilians and some local heroes completely dumbfounded, looking at it completely shocked before they start locking back in, doing all they can to evacuate the people. Aizawa sitting at the base of one of these two skyscrapers sits and watching as the top would slowly slide off the bottom, seeing people fall, glass cracking and metal dropping to the floor above him. Seeing this, he gets himself up, looking into the sky for Deku but not seeing him at all, deciding to put his faith in him as he starts to walk away, grabbing onto a couple of people that were like knocked out next to him until eventually he runs into Manuel. Manuel and him would start to help some civilians out, getting them all into a group before starting to run them all out of the area, both of them trying to keep collateral as low as they can. As this happens, Deku would be sitting in that same restaurant building, feeling as the entire building started to tilt over. He looks to his left, seeing the building next to him completely crumbling down to dust, collapsing under its own weight. He looks to his right to see civilians and heroes rushing around frantically. All of them were in trouble because he didn't lock in. Knowing this, Deku would stare the Nomu back down again, watching as the Nomu started to walk closer, about to start talking until a couple of heroes from behind him would start to shoot some flimsy attacks at him, shooting off some like little discs that would start to explode on his back, with another hero behind him shooting some like water at him or something. Deku seeing the explosions and the water splash would be horrified. No, what are you doing? Staring on as the Nomu would stop, turning around to look at the other two. The other two stare at Deku. Get up, kid, we got your back. Coming in with like huge smiles on their face, all optimistic, until the Nomu's arm would start to tweak to the right of him, fingers twitching as his hand would start to augment itself, hardening before splitting into about 10 little rope things, cracking behind him before getting shot straight at the two heroes. Deku watches on, still hurt from that last attack, watching and seeing as the tendrils the Nomu shot would tear straight through the two heroes in front of him. They don't even hit him, they go clean through the two of them. The Nomu being like, "You're in the way," flicking their bodies off the building before staring back at Deku again. Deku seeing this is just like fuming. Those people died for nothing. He feels his chakra spiking around his entire body, concentrating and coating it around himself. It forms around him, jagged and sharp, flickering to life as Deku would get up. He keeps his eye on him the entire time, slowly starting to make some hand signs before he gets in a fighting stance, staring the Nomu down, who begins to smile, knowing exactly what was about to go down. The two of them, without even saying anything, would rush straight into the middle, going in and throwing straight hands with each other. You gotta remember, the guy that made the Nomu beforehand was like a boxer or something like that, I'm pretty sure, in like an underground quirk use like boxing ring, kind of like that guy Rapper used to do, you know? And due to that, he wouldn't run away from this at all, going in and happily meeting Deku in the middle. Like you would think this is a clash of titans, the building around him cracking and creaking as soon as they start to throw punches, every impact causing the glass to break more and more. Deku using his sharingan to analyze every single move that he makes, seeing the muscles twitch in the Nomu's body before the Nomu even moves and stuff, ducking between its arms, around its neck and stuff like that, using the Nomu's big body against it, getting a couple of sneaky hits in before he finishes his hand signs from before, flowing chakra into his hand as it would start to light up into electricity. The Nomu being like, you have multiple quirks too? Staring Deku down, he would start to smile, a sadistic smile straight back at him. Hell no, I'm nothing like you. Rushing back in again and dodging every single one of the Nomu's next hits. Seeing the Nomu's arms separate and start to like headhunt him down. Dodging them all again before getting in close. Using his chakra covered hand as like a Chidori almost and slamming it straight into the Nomu. Flowing as much chakra as he could from his body straight into the Nomu, watching as it instantly starts frying in front of him, all the lightning style channeling throughout his entire body. Deku seeing this would jump backwards, knowing the Nomu was only going to be still for a couple more seconds, immediately spamming as many hand sizes as he could before taking the biggest breath in he's ever taken, staring the Nomu down and sending his biggest fireball ever right towards it. This fireball eclipses the building they were in, hitting the Nomu straight on and forcing him straight out into the open air, about to lowkey incinerate it until the Nomu would tear its own head off, throwing it into a nearby alleyway as it regenerates. Aizawa on the floor noticing the second sun in the sky, seeing Deku's fireball burn bright, noticing a little speck flying off in the distance, this of course being the Nomu's head. Seeing this, he kind of calms down a little bit, thinking it was done, thinking the speck was just like a piece of building or something like that. And due to that, he kind of starts to drop his guard. Deku doesn't though, he continues forward, rushing straight towards the Nomu's head, seeing it was already damn near regenerated. He knows that fire style is pretty much his only option here, and due to that he starts to make hella hand signs, taking a huge breath in again until the Nomu would sneak attack him, having sent his arm to the right of him so it didn't track, going straight towards Deku and barely missing once more. Deku this time using his energy to sharpen it into like a blade, cutting his arm clean off, which it regenerates straight away. They both fall to the floor, continuing on, Nomu sending punches with those like jet blasters which would break everything around them. Aizawa about 200 meters in the distance would feel the ground shake, looking on and seeing the fight still going, immediately dropping everything he was doing and rushing straight towards them. Manuel like screaming for him to stop and telling him he's too injured, which Aizawa would completely ignore, rushing towards Deku instead. As he does this, Aizawa would cancel his quirk, the Nomu feeling it immediately, looking around before seeing him in the distance. The Nomu's like, pesky little hero. Deku seeing this smiles, jumping into a backflip while in the air breathing in, slamming the Nomu with another fire style and leaving his throat completely burnt. The Nomu tanks this, looking directly at Deku. That didn't hurt as much. Are you running out of power? Deku's like, it's perceptive too, locking back in as it turns towards Aizawa, bulking its arm up amongst the flame and the smoke around him. Deku's eyes going wide, seeing the movements already playing out, the arm stretching towards Aizawa, the muscles stretching and contorting. Seeing this happen, he lowers himself down, slamming his hands onto the floor and trying to make a mud wall again. The Nomu though predicted it this time, using its muscles to break its own arm, twisting around the mud wall and slamming straight into Aizawa. Deku's vision goes blurry, seeing blood scatter around the battlefield, watching in slow motion as the Nomu's arm pierces straight through Aizawa's chest, going completely through him before the Nomu would pull it back out again. Aizawa feeling this looks at Deku, feeling the pain for a split second before looking down, seeing a huge hole where his heart should have been. Seeing this, he looks back up, faintly smiling towards Deku as his hair drops, eyes closing as Aizawa would die there and then. The Nomu stares at him. Good. He got in the way. I want to test my abilities against you, not him. Sending both of its arms out, grabbing onto Deku's shoulders as it charges its jet propulsor on the back, slamming Deku up into the air. Deku kinda numb replays what just happened in his head, seeing Aizawa getting pierced over and over again. As he flings up into the air, he goes through all of his memories with Aizawa, going through memory lane as his brain starts reacting, flooding his body with a new type of chakra, one that unlocked his perfect eyes. Deku feels something change inside of him, still limp in his own body as he's slammed by an attack by the Nomu. Deku being grabbed from afar before being thrown down onto the floor at top speed, an attack that would kill 99% of people. The Nomu flies over to him, seeing his body limp on the floor, dropping and landing next to him. What happened? You didn't even block, staring at Deku's lifeless body. Oh well. Are there any stronger heroes around? Oh my god, starting to look around himself before finding some civilians off in the distance, like a moth to a flame, starting to walk over as Deku would begin to get back up again. Everyone off in the distance is going nuts. To them, like 4 skyscrapers just blew up in front of them. A huge fireball just went off into the sky, and they still don't know what the villain looks like. The Nomu would fly onto a nearby rooftop, staring over the crowd as someone would finally spot him, screaming straight away after seeing him and pointing at him, telling everyone to look. Everyone finally clocking it starts to run, scattering like ants below him as the Nomu would start to bulk up its arm again. If no heroes come out, then I'll have to make them come out, starting to sharpen its arm up again until it starts to feel the worst pain it's ever felt in its life, screaming to the heavens and looking back only to see hellfire itself spreading over its entire body. The Nomu feels itself cooking, feeling its limbs turning to ash as its regeneration couldn't keep up. As a last resort, it once again tears its own head, throwing it up into the air to scan who did that, seeing no one behind it but one person, Deku, who was now standing, holding onto his face. Deku, having used amaterasu for the first time, feels his eyes convulsing, almost feeling like it was tearing itself apart. He feels drops coming down his face, only to look down and see blood. In the moments leading to his Mangekyo awakening, he wanted nothing more than for the Nomu to burn in hell, and due to that, his eyes would react. Like you would think, Deku would have his 2 Mangekyo awakened now, immediately staring back at the Nomu again, fighting through the pain. He saw it once again charging up another attack, spinning and hardening before sharpening itself, throwing itself right at Deku again as Deku would stare, channeling all of his energy into his left eye once more as Amaterasu would start to spam right towards the Nomu again. Right away gets hit in his arms, feeling them burn up and disintegrate right off his body, about to rip its head off again until Deku would use his second ability, this of course being tsukyomi, staring the Nomu straight down and sending it straight into his mindscape. I don't know why, but I feel like tsukyomi would work on this. I mean, like, it's still got a brain in there, and due to that, the Nomu would be hit instantly, going into its mindscape and seeing Deku and Aizawa standing right in front of it. The Nomu chained up on a cross as black flames started to spread all around it, burning away at it as Deku and Aizawa would watch, feeling its entire body covered in amaterasu flames for about 70 hours straight, in real life completely motionless, dead still as amaterasu would start to burn it up, completely turning it to ash in the middle of the street. No onlookers around to see it as Deku would eliminate the Nomu there and then, feeling the pain coming over his body once more but fighting through it. He looks back towards Aizawa, seeing him dead on the floor, taking about 3 steps towards him before he collapses himself, being completely knocked out as a couple of rescue heroes would be flooded into the area. Deku out cold for about 3 days straight, his body and mind adjusting to his new powers. As he's asleep, the rest of the heroes would start to rescue the area, going in and finding as many civilians as they can, starting to rebuild all the buildings, and in general trying to figure out what even happened. Time ticking on until eventually Deku would wake up once more, waking up in a sweat before he sits up, looking around himself and feeling his sharingan were permanently on. Stuck on base state, staring around himself, he feels a huge wave of pain coming over himself, grabbing onto his head once more as his eyes start to bleed. Doctors rushing to his side as Deku's heart rate would start to spike, all of the memories flooding back into his head again. The fight, what happened, all the heroes that died in front of him, and the moment that Aizawa got stabbed floods right into his brain again. Deku staring completely still at his hands, seeing blood covering him, all the doctors and stuff trying to wake him up as Deku would fall asleep again, being knocked out for another day straight until he would wake up, this time completely silently, staring at his hands for about an hour straight, in his mind figuring out what he had to do, getting a plan of action together before he decides to split, getting out of bed, taking all of his needles and stuff out before jumping out the window, rushing straight back to UA, sneaking inside and grabbing a bag full of stuff. He takes one final look at UA before nodding, knowing this was going to be the last time he sees it in a while, putting his hero costume on as he starts to roam the streets. Like you would think, Deku works kind of like a stain almost, but like an anti-stain, going around beating petty thugs, using genjutsu on every single person he captures to try and get as much information as he can, finding small tidbits of information about the League of Villains, about how the Nomus are created, and eventually finding information about All For One himself. Knowing that All For One was the big bad, he sets his eyes straight on him, keeping an eye on what Class 1A would be doing as he tracks All For One himself. Over the next couple of weeks, Deku would go solo about half of the League of Villains himself, going and beating Toga, not even needing his quirk against that gecko guy, one-upping Darby's flames with his Amaterasu flames, and even killing twice himself. Doing all this and using genjutsu on all of them to get as much information as he can. Doing this, he finds out about All For One using orphanages to get hella quirks for himself, putting a stop to that, and eventually finding out where All For One was, both the Camino bar and the hospital. Along with that, he also finds out their plans for invading the forest training camp, deciding to put an end to it all then. Knowing he has about 3 days left until Class 1A will be getting sent there, he starts getting ready. In this time, he trains with his Mangekyo Sharingan, trying to hone its abilities to the max, finding out that using it too much doesn't just hurt its eyes, it also slowly seals him away. Deku slowly noticing that his vision was getting worse and worse, knowing he could only use them sparingly, training all he can with them nonetheless before eventually the forest training camp would come around. Class 1A, like usual, getting everyone loaded onto the bus. This time everyone's silent though, all mortified on what happened to Deku and Aizawa. No one has a lead on what happened to Deku, so in their eyes he might have just died as well. It's pretty damn grim. All of them sitting completely silent on the bus ride there until eventually they get to the training camp. Deku around halfway through the first day would get there too, setting up his own little camp about a kilometer away from him and starting to watch from a distance. He watches his old classmates grow, seeing Bakugo and them training and kind of feeling bad for leaving, watching them for the next 2 days straight, reminiscing on the old times, looking at everyone and seeing they were all sad, knowing he could return but only after he's completed this. Due to that, the next 2 days he would just kind of sit in the forest, doing his own thing until the third day would finally roll around. Deku feeling a presence that was weirdly familiar, seeing someone off in the distance standing dead still before almost teleporting away. All for One, of course, goes and steals a search quirk, about to leave before he scans the place, seeing Deku's name pop up. Now, I know that's not how the original search quirk works, because Ragdoll wouldn't have seen him, but who cares? As soon as he sees him, he smiles, flying up into the air before rushing straight over to Deku, his fist lighting up with hella quirks, Dark Ball plus Energy Beam, plus Quirk Booster ×4, plus Kinetic Booster ×3, setting off his huge opener attack which lights up the sky, setting off a huge beam that cuts from left to right, completely searing the entire forest in front of him. Every blade of grass, every tree, and every insect within like a 10-kilometer radius gets sliced straight into, energy coursing throughout the area, about to kill like half the class until Deku would summon his Susanoo, protecting them and pushing his energy beam away. All for One stares Deku down. So you were the one that beat Hood. No matter, that was merely a test. He opens a portal next to him, summoning about 10 Nomus to the side of him, all high ends, about to flood the forest until Deku would light them all up with amaterasu, incinerating them all there and then. All for One Lowkey kinda shocked, feeling as a couple of danger sense quirks go off, putting a barrier up just in time as Deku would spam amaterasu towards him as well, about to get hit until it disperses in front of him. All for One smiling, I like the way you think, and I like the way that quirk works. Putting his hand up in front of him as his fingers start to tweak out, quirk amplification, plus finger pistol, plus spear like bones, plus tendrils, plus air cannon, watching as his fingers start to tweaking out before huge tendrils start to spike out towards the entire forest, once again being blocked by Deku's Susanoo, Deku feeling every cell in his body burning just by activating it, putting his hand up as the skeleton around him starts to grow, growing muscles and skin before it starts getting aligned with small plates of armor, energy sword growing in his hand as he thrusts it forward, Bakugo in the class behind him like confused as hell. What the hell is that thing? All watching on as the sky once again lights up, All for One charging up another kill shot as Deku would begin to stare at him, right eye slowly spinning as he stares him dead in his eyes, All for One blinking before being sent to the Shadow Realm, being put up on the cross like the Nomu as Deku stands in front of him. All for One looks around himself, seeing himself chained up before staring at Deku. What did you do to me? Starting to shake and tear at the chains until Deku would swipe his finger, completely covering his mouth and slamming a sword into his side. All for One screams, muffled by the thing that just covered his mouth. Staring at Deku's words would begin to flood into his mind. Words explaining what tsukyomi was, explaining how Deku was pretty much a god, how he had full control over time, and how seconds in the real world could be days inside here. All for One hearing this has his eyes go wide, staring as another clone of Deku would stab him in the side again, constantly going over and over again, doing this for a year straight in his mind. Deku Loki getting all of his anger out, you know, subjecting All for One to the same pain that Aizawa felt, getting it all off his chest before going back to the real world, feeling a huge pain coming over his body, feeling the Susanoo drop as his Mangekyo deactivate, looking off in the distance with blood trickling down his eyes to see All for One falling, dropping completely brain dead to the floor, Deku slowly rubbing his eyes, feeling the pain going away, looking around the place and seeing everything blurry. He fights through it, going back to base state and tracking where All for One landed, going over to it and finding All for One dead on the floor, staring down at him before activating amaterasu, burning him to ash completely there and then just in case, and walking back to his little camp before passing out, being found by a couple of the students in Class 1A and Class 1B, and being taken straight to the hospital. Like you would think, he sleeps off the next couple of days again, before waking up again, this time seeing everything around him completely blurred, his vision degrading even more after using amaterasu that last time, a trade-off which in his eyes was worth it. He looks around him, seeing the silhouettes of people that he was once familiar with, all the kids in Class 1A surrounding his bed, along with a couple of other add-ons. Everyone seeing that Deku woke up immediately starts asking him questions, asking him why he was in the forest, asking him what happened, before All Might and a couple of government figures start to get him all out the room, forcing him out as they ask him personally what happened. Deku explaining every single detail, telling him how he went rogue, how he killed a couple of villains, and how he cremated All for One, not leaving a single detail out, which to his surprise is met by smiles. All of them Loki kinda glad that he did it. All Might explaining who All for One is and what his quirk can do before thanking him personally, asking him a couple more questions before letting him rest a little bit. The Hero Commission and UA kinda sweeping this under the rug, giving Deku a pardon and allowing him to go back to school again. From there, Deku would do the next 2 years of school, just being a regular ass student, never really using the Mangekyo again because he never really needed to. I mean, Overhaul's dead, Shigaraki's dead, All for One's dead, and like 3/4 of the League of Villains is dead. And due to that, Deku would live a long and prosperous life, though he can only use his base sharingan, no Mangekyo, because his eyes are cooked. Anyways, that is the end of the story. I'm sorry this took so long. I've been putting it off for the longest time because I had no clue where I wanted this story to go. I know I said that I did, but I didn't. I hope you like it either way. I think that I gave him Mangekyous a little bit too late into the game and kind of gave him the Susanoo, like a strong version of it, way too strong for the point that he was supposed to be at. Who cares though? I hope you guys end up liking it anyway. If you also didn't notice, this is a new mic. I got a new mic like halfway through. I think I switched it like 35 minutes or something like that. So if it sounds any better, please tell me. I think it does, and I hope it does because it costs like $300. All that stuff being said, if you're watching on Spotify, thank you for watching. My Spotify's been going crazy. If you're on YouTube, please comment the word snail. First person to comment the word snail will get pinned in the comments. I've also got another like non-what if video coming out eventually, which is what I've been working on the side, which has been taking ages because I hate editing. So look out for that. And of course, thank you to Xehther for making this video possible. I probably never would have done an Itachi Deku unless it was for him. It came out good and I'm hoping that I lived up to his first part, but overall it's pretty fun. Oh, and big shout out to our members. Amplify, I think that's how you say it. Random21, the GOAT, of course the GOAT. Lupus, for real the GOAT, yeah, the other GOAT. And Aronka, the other GOAT. All three of them are the GOATs, or four of them the GOATs actually. They've been huge help and they always give me lots of support, so big ups to them. That being said, I'm going to end it here. Look forward to a new upload in probably like 2 weeks because I still have to write a lot of my 4K special and my 3K special. So yeah, look forward to that. Anyway, stay safe, Merry late Christmas, and I hope you all got spoiled. Catch ya.